See ya.
Lovely. So what we're going to be talking about today is something that's been working on, and it's called Digital is the New Normal, Changing Gears in the Post-Pandemic World. And okay, so it's a webinar, and this is Pratim Datta. So I'll go forward with it, and of course, you know, given that it is truly an interesting world, a musician is now, of course, Bob Dylan, as we all know, very famous line, which is "For the times they are a-changing." But he's also, it tells you an interesting time, because I think he's the very first musician to ever win a Nobel Prize for literature, right? So while, you know, it shows you that we constantly evolve. And as we evolve, sometimes the evolution is a known evolution. Sometimes it's a very punctuated shift in the way we've traditionally done things. And I think that shift is what is coming, and that is where the times they are changing. So here's the agenda. The story behind this is that there's a massive worldwide pivot towards digital transformation, but it comes with promises and pitfalls. What are they, and how can managers prepare for the new digital first world order? So what we will look at is a quick business preview. Given that you are a sort of a very privileged group of executive MBAs, it is important to understand various facets of business, rather, even though you might be a functional head somewhere. And that's what we'll do. We'll try and tie together multiple different pieces of digital transformation and the global impact, and its global impact on societies, operations, sustainability, marketing, HR, AI, finance, strategy. And then we'll finish off with a Q&A session. So here we go. So the pre-pandemic world. So it goes like a fairy tale, right? So once upon a time, in February 2020, the US unemployment was at 3.5%. Wages were growing rapidly. The Chinese tariff war was right at, you know, the final waning period. It was ending, and spring was in the air, and everybody was feeling absolutely fabulous. Then, of course, came the wicked witch from the east, right? And that was the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And it rode the horses of globalization. Had we not been in a global world, we would have rarely encountered something like this. But it tells you a story that takes you back a century. During the 1918 Spanish flu, which became, to a certain degree, the first truly, you know, what we call as pandemic, it rode on the first lines of globalization, from global sets of railways that were, you know, and steamships that were sort of constantly creating long and wide networks all around the world. But the Spanish flu came in right after the First World War to the US, and then it spread rapidly thanks to the global order of things at that point of time, which were the railroads. And of course, with prosperity comes peril. And the world changed forever. But very much like the roaring 1920s, we are on the verge of cyber 2020s. Now that's at least what I'm calling it. 100 years ago, the assembly line changed it all. This time, digital transformation is in line to mark this century. So what started off once upon a time as the very first assembly line that changed the entire way we produce things and consume things faster and quicker than ever, this time digital transformation is changing the way we are consuming things in a very different manner, in a very different channel, and with a very different process. So moving forward, so I'll have a bunch of fun interviews, and you can just you know, tune in and open your mics and just type it out. I won't be able to see your responses, but I'll wait for about 5-10 seconds and then give you the response. Here's the first fun interview. During the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the top Google search trends was on whether quarantine was a hoax. What was the most popular way the same group of people searched for the word quarantine on Google? Quarantine, of course, quarantine, or keratin. So this is what people used to actually search, even though they didn't, some people knew and some people didn't know how to spell it. And if you want to voice it, but I'll wait for about 10 seconds and give you a quick response on what the answer is.
You've got a few in the chat.
So 10 seconds. I'm sure some of you got it. It was actually number 2, which is quarantine. People oftentimes didn't even know how to spell quarantine, so they were searching for the term quarantine on Google searches to figure out whether quarantine was a hoax. Second one is, which country's president touted that you could not see viruses flying around and vodka and sauna were the best cures? First choice, Venezuela. Second choice, Belarus. And the third choice, Kazakhstan. Again, 10 seconds to the bell's up.
Well, you've got some variety in answers here.
Good. So, all right. So we're going to
Good one.
I'm not going to hazard looking at what you've taught because I can't actually right now, but the answer is Belarus. The president of Belarus simply said, well, frankly speaking, if you can't see it flying around, just drink some vodka, take a sauna, and you'll be fine. Carrying on then. The post-pandemic work, right? So once upon a time, what happened, but this is what we're facing now. Life changed forever after the pandemic. What happened was as the pandemic hit, every single country decided we have to do something about making sure that we maintain some kind of economic continuity. And how do they do that? The common thing that we always do, that has been done for at least 300 years, possibly, has been make money easily accessible, easily available by making it cheap, which means reduce your interest rates to the bare minimum. So money became too cheap. In Japan, it was verging on negative interest rates because Japan has a lot of deflation. Switzerland, Denmark, Japan, they all put in negative interest rates, which basically meant that we're pleading with people to not save money in a bank, rather consume or invest, because if you're saving money, you're actually going to lose money, or you're going to actually lose you'll have a negative interest rate, which means maybe you're going to lose 1 percentage point every year. $100 becomes $99. ECB, which is the European Central Bank, set its interest rates at 0%, which means money became very, very cheap. But that also created a socioeconomic divide. The ones that work from home could easily leverage the cheap money to consume and invest in markets. Thus, we see that there's been a massive 16% jump in S&P year upon year, the S&P 500, and real estate has jumped up by about 10% year to year. On the other hand, the ones that were under quarantine furloughs had no income. So the government handed them free money along with low rates, which creates a very interesting business opportunity and a problem. Firstly, because free money was floating around, inflation, of course, has become an issue. Right now, inflation is about 3.4% in the US, and it's compounded with a complacency of people to return to work because they're just getting free money from the government. So you've got 3.5 million unfulfilled vacancies since February 2020. And oftentimes these vacancies are in some of the most important areas, from project managers to people who need to help digitally transform the economy, to people who are cybersecurity experts, and so on and so forth. And you see this everywhere. Even entry-level jobs are promoting $15 wages, but nobody wants to come in and take them because it's cheaper and easier to make money from home, from whether it's unemployment or something else. So one way to tame wage inflation and the lack of workers is to digitally transform. And that's what governments are focusing on. The world looked to China at the same time to keep running factories when the rest of the world was in lockdown. So when the world went into lockdown, people still needed things. We still wanted to spend money on Amazon. And how do you do that? Somebody has to produce it. Who produces? Guess what? We look eastward again. The same place where the virus came from. And suddenly China's production ramped up to make sure that it would be the only country that would serve the entire world economy in a bolder and a stronger way than it's ever done before. Soon expensive Chinese products continue to flood markets. It tamed, that's why you don't see prices of television going up, prices of fridges going up. But you see inflation happening in areas such as investments, which is in the stock market, and in real estate, because China is to a certain degree taming a lot of this inflation by producing more and sending the whole world things. So, and then China also said that now they're getting more money out of this entire lockdown scenario. We're going to strengthen our production dollars to build a technological infrastructure by controlling microchips, electric vehicle technologies, space tech, and AI. Do you realize China, right, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, China, the Tianzhong space station, they sent their first astronauts to the space station. Other than the United States, they're the only ones to have a rover on Mars, right? So China is truly ramping up what it thinks is going to be defined as the next Chinese evolution, which is controlling technology, the way technology is evolving into the future. So, welcome to the Cyber 2020s. So the world of digital transformation is therefore poised to drive the economy. Just the way World War I and the Spanish flu pivoted the economy to mass production technologies and the assembly line, a 2020 McKinsey survey finds that COVID-19 speeded up the adoption of digital technologies by several years. It is the age of telework, with really rethinking while residential real estate has gone up in value, commercial real estate has fallen in value. People don't want to go to malls. People don't want to have, or companies don't want larger and larger offices because more and more people, the pandemic taught companies that you could actually make people more productive by allowing them to work from home rather than having them present at the office. And we will talk a little bit about that because that is a very interesting HR take on work-life balance. E-commerce has been changing retail. There was a 200% increase in e-commerce in 1 year. It is the age of automation and AI, from facial recognition to virus contagion tracking apps, to understanding road networks and where people are congregating. It is the age where we are being driven by a lot of AI. And NASDAQ, of course, rose by 45%, while the Dow Jones rose by 10% year on year. The reason why I mention this is to realize NASDAQ is symbolic of the technological stock market. NASDAQ typically has technology stocks in it, while Dow Jones is a very diversified portfolio of tech and non-tech stocks. But it tells you that tech is becoming such a predominant force that it rose 4.5 times more than what Dow Jones did year upon year. This thanks to actually Laurie, and actually we ended up reading the same article, I suppose, just about the same time. It shows it's from McKinsey and Company. It's from one of their surveys that the COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the digitization of customer interaction by several years. And the average share of customer interactions that are digital, you see that global adoption acceleration has gone up dramatically, including in Asia Pacific, in Europe, and highest in North America, right? So let's talk about how this cyber 2020s digital transformation is changing various different areas. Of course, whenever we talk about operations and supply chain, we cannot, it's heavily underscored by the new generation of much more savvy consumers who want consumption as well as sustainability. But there is, of course, a paradox. While governments want people to consume more consumption also means less sustainability. And that's the paradox. Consumption is needed for economic growth, while limiting consumption is needed for sustainability. And companies are suddenly asking themselves this question. Every time somebody actually drives to the office, returns back from the office, prints a bunch of paper, circulates a bunch of paper, that has a very negative effect on any kind of sustainability. If we could digitally transform that set, by firstly digitizing a bunch of processes, could that reshape consumption, still keep consumption active, yet increase sustainability? And that is one of the studies that Amazon did when it started off its Kindle line of ebooks, that people actually read more. It's not that people don't read more, the way they consume books has dramatically changed, and that is a digital transformation of reading itself. But they now get it through the ether, rather than having to print a book, get the paper, put in energy to print ink on paper, bind them, use glue, which uses a lot of petrochemicals, then ship it, which creates a lot of logistical needs. Instead, you can just transform it. I think Amazon calls it whisper sync. And voila, the minute you purchase it, you can consume it immediately. And you see the same thing happening with music, with movies, with video games, amongst other things. On the other hand, companies such as Apple, which has always been on the forefront of sustainability or sustainable operations, has started something called the Daisy Recycler, which is recycling all used iPhones, taking off all that gold and the cobalt from the batteries, recycling them. And they have basically a robot that completely recycles without any kind of human intervention. Amazon's Kiva is increasing factory space while reducing the number of people needed at its warehouses. Tesla's production robots became very popular during California's lockdown when people weren't allowed to walk into a production facility. Tesla, or Elon Musk at Tesla, invested heavily in robotics to build Model 3, because robots don't need to be quarantined. You can still operate, and these robots come from a Japanese company, a very famous company called Fanuc, which uses something called a lights out factory, where robots take care of robots. And if you get a chance, it's called FANUC. And Tesla's robots are Fanuc robots too. But I think Japan's world record is, or the company's world record is that it's been operating for a full year, a lights out factory, without any human being ever stepping into the whole frame. China, on the other hand, is focusing on a slightly different story. Its whole idea is that if China knows that the world is becoming more and more technology and digital transformation dependent, which means that a lot more technological hardware is going to be needed to replace the physical hardware that we're used to. So their idea has been, let's control the metal supply chain, from semiconductor to batteries, where you see, the cobalt that's found in Congo. China's trying to control that. And then, of course, it's creating these huge logistical networks from Africa to the poles, from China right into Eastern Europe, especially actually even at the verge of Southern Europe, which is known as the very famous Belt and Road Initiative. Then, of course, you see a new generation. And at any time, what's the very famous phrase? Necessity is the mother of invention. In Milton Keynes, very, very close to London, a new company started right during the severe lockdown that Boris Johnson advocated. People needed food and people needed groceries, yet people weren't even allowed, or companies weren't even allowing grocery drivers, delivery drivers, to drive things. So this company called Starship Technologies started using these robots, the ones you can see at the bottom of the screen to the right, in order to solve this last mile problem. How do we deliver it? Even you might be living, I don't know, a couple of miles away or a mile away from the grocery store, but you can't walk down the streets to get it. So what they've done is they created these delivery robots that would be filled with a QR code and an ID, and it would walk up, drive up right up to your house and fulfill the need. Similarly, you see Zipline Drones, a new company that was founded just to deliver everything from pharmaceuticals to do quick medical transplantation work. These companies are suddenly growing. And given that about 3 years ago, the FAA opened up the aerospace for drone operations, it is just a matter of time before drones show the next generation of logistics transformation. And if you look at it, Zipline Drones is now heavily funded by UPS. So here's another fun interlude. The first question. Ready? What item was introduced to limit contagion after the 19th century tuberculosis epidemic? First, one is spittoon, where you spit. Second one was a toilet commode. Third option, vapor machine. It shouldn't be vapor, but vapor machine. And take a pick again, 10 seconds for you to think about it. Once again, what item was introduced to limit contagion after the 19th century tuberculosis epidemic? All right, 10 seconds up, and the answer was a spittoon. Or the answer is a spittoon. The US especially had realized at that point of time that there was a nasty habit because of course, the US, when it started from Jamestown onwards, had a lot of tobacco farmers, and chewing tobacco was a very common phenomenon. Given that that was the case, people used to spit a lot. So, of course, when you have tuberculosis, you want to sort of try and impede people from, or ask people to refrain from spilling out bodily fluids, and including spitting. So a spittoon was invented at that point of time. Second question, what are the names of Tesla's two most famous production robots that churn out about 11,000 cars a month? Option one, Android, or it should be Android and Arachnid. Option two, Athena and Poseidon. Option three, Wolverine and Iceman. Again, 10 seconds. And the answer is number three, which is Wolverine and Iceman. And so those are the names of Tesla's very famous production robots that during the lockdown became the ones that were still constantly producing and supplying the Model 3, which has become one of Tesla's biggest hits. All right, so carrying on. We talked about operations and sustainability, supply chains, and let's go into digital transformation going on in finance. Of course, the biggest change that we are likely to see in the next 5 to 10 years or so is going to be a shift from a physical currency to a digital currency. The US is experimenting with something called the digidollar, and China's trying out something called the EU. While we see things like Bitcoins and Dogecoins and Ethereum or Ether wallets becoming very popular, and of course, some of them doing quite well, but they're also extremely volatile. To a certain degree, Bitcoins have become so popular that El Salvador just adopted Bitcoin as one of its proper countrywide currency. But it's still very volatile. China's taking a very different approach. What it's doing is it's creating e-yuan, which is still pegged to the yuan. So it's nothing but a digital version of the yuan, which is their currency, also called a renminbi, which stands for people's money. But they experimented by giving away about 300 electronic yuan to people. Automatically your wallet would be loaded with very much like a gift card that you have to spend. But the Chinese government said you have to spend it within 45 days or the value starts dropping or the value goes away completely, which gives you an interesting sense of how money itself is changing the whole idea of fungibility. Governments can now even spur consumption by saying that the value of the money is going to change faster. So we would rather have you spend it quicker or else you won't have it. On the other hand, you can see how Alibaba's Ant Group opened and closed Sesame. Alibaba is possibly one of the world's largest exchanges. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. Actually, it's supposed to be priced at about $100 billion, but it is a single stop shop where you can do and buy everything that you want. So you can pay using your own currency, but the charismatic leader of Alibaba, his name is Jack Ma, challenged the Chinese government by saying, either the Chinese banks change themselves or we will change the banks by creating their own money. And suddenly the Chinese government took note, and guess what? Jack Ma, to a certain degree, has been chastised, and he's taken a much more of a quieter role in the company. But it tells you something much more interesting, which is if we see the coming of the digidollar, they're planning on coming up with an electronic euro or a digital euro, or something like an EU. Money supply and the powers and peril of private fintech, this is known as financial technology, is changing the way we even think of digital transformation in the financial sector. The other question that companies and countries are asking is, how do you credit score the unbanked population? There are about 3 to 4 billion people in the world that are completely unbanked, yet they still use money. How do you not only create a credit score, but also how do you start leveraging the potential of this unbanked population? And of course, it is the age of Bitcoins and blockchains, right? If you think of physical money, the problem with physical money, and I think we were just having a chat with the EMBAs, that rather than dealing with problems about illegal immigration and so forth, where people are operating on cash basis, no reporting of how much they're making to the government or anything like that. If tomorrow suddenly we move everything into digital currencies and nobody is using cash any longer, you automatically have a lot of transparency and opacity. It's a lot of the age of transparency, but it can reduce the opacity from having a cash-based society. So you can't just pay somebody under the table. Everything would automatically be declared. And guess what? Europe has found by just transforming a lot of its digital transformation of collecting money from the public rather than in cash, but only digitally. And we, the EMBAs, we all went together to work with the Italian government on a digital transformation, on the same digital transformation that they were doing. They realized that the Italian government's revenues went up by 8% in one single year, because now you couldn't just hide the money you were spending or saving or paying or bribing. You had to declare everything. So transparency increased, opacity decreased. So transparent blockchains and anonymous Bitcoin wallets. But of course, with that, you have issues such as, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, from ransomware to crypto hacks. We'll talk a little bit about Colonial Pipeline later. Suddenly, we're dealing with a world where your identity is just a login and a password. If somebody can get into that, you won't have access to anything any longer, because you're no longer physically controlling anything whatsoever. Finally, our society and work. Of course, there's a huge suburban flight in this post-pandemic world. I've got friends who are moving from Manhattan to Westchester County, to the Palisades, because they want to get away from the city. On the other hand, commercial real estate is also suffering. Companies such as Apple, heavily touting a 3-day office week, that you work, but you work longer, you work harder, you work more productively with greater performance, but you don't have to be present at the office, because presence is not always equal to performance. Mainly because the West is realizing that they need to sort of reconcile with China's competitive advantage of what China calls its 996 economy. So if you were to meet with any Chinese manager, executive, they will typically say that the common phrase is, we follow a 996 work rule. We work 9 to 9 every day, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, 6 days a week. But the US, France, on the other hand, has a 35-hour work week. The US still maintains a 40 to 46-hour work week with, depending on the level you are at the company. But it's dealing with this presence versus performance paradox. Do you need to be present in order to perform? And the answer is, if you give people the chance to create a better work-life balance, people are more likely to be more productive while not being physically present. Plus, of course, you save huge amounts of money on commercial real estate costs, as well as your ancillary costs, such as filling up, everything from replacing hand soap and toilet paper to filling up coffee, and of course, paying leases and rents for expensive places in expensive locations. You see the same story happening in society, where people are trying to get more fit, but instead of going to gyms during the pandemic, people are owning Peloton, where suddenly you're creating a much more of a networked setup. And you can share, you can compete, you can share while not being physically co-located. And it's no different from what we saw between Netflix and Blockbuster. Blockbuster was a place where you physically went, physically got a copy of a DVD or a video, a long time ago, VHS tape. That went away the minute Netflix came to town. The same company that was once the defining video rental place went bankrupt. You see the same story with Uber Eats and DoorDash. In April 2020, in the height of pandemic fears, Bureau of Labor Statistics reported nearly 38% unemployment in hotels and food service workers. Statistics were more dire for Lyft and Uber drivers. Globally, approximately 100 million workers were unemployed in these high-risk travels and tourism-related services, with a $1 trillion drop in global GDP right during the pandemic. However, during the same period, Uber's food delivery service experienced a sales growth of 54%, and Uber's revenue grew 14% year on year. Not Uber's car riding service, but Uber's delivery service. So how we've started consuming, how society started consuming, how society started working has dramatically changed over time, and a lot of them will stay. So here's the third, fun interlude. According to The Economist, digital transformation is touted to firstly increase cost efficiencies. What is the second most touted reason? Option 1, increase revenues. Option 2, increase productivity. Option 3, increase sustainability. Again, 10 seconds to the clock. And the answer is increased sustainability. So that is being touted as the biggest tour de force of the digital transformation that is coming. Fewer steps also means greater sustainability. Second one, other than social distancing requirements during the lockdown, some countries recommended refraining from smoking, Spain, and drinking alcohol, South Africa. What did Mexico ask its citizens to refrain from? Option 1, church. Option 2, junk food. Option 3, travel. Again, timer starts now. 10 seconds. All right, time's up, and I hope you got it. The answer is junk food. Mexico is so worried that people are simply going to fall sicker because they would just sit at home and eat junk food and suddenly start troubling hospitals that were already on the verge of collapse from tackling COVID-19 related issues, that the government simply said, please stop eating junk food. Use this opportunity to actually try cooking healthier food. So going forward, and we'll quickly finish off on marketing. Of course, you're seeing that we're no longer dealing in this world, a world where we're doing these mass mailings and using a shotgun approach towards marketing. Instead, companies such as Root and Noble, and I've tried both of them. All you do is you download the app and you drive around, and the app measures how good your braking is, when do you drive, do you speed in a non-speed zone, because they've got location tracking on, and will create your own car insurance tailored just for you and your driving, rather than based on, your age, your gender, whether you're married or not, where you live or not. But so no longer treating you as a part of a large set, but as a customer segment of one. Internet of Things, these smart devices that we have, from garage door openers, these automatic garage door openers to automatic lights, automatic thermostats. Suddenly, location is no longer matters, but habits do. If you suddenly realize that your Google Nest home is sending out signals that fire alarm, because I might be a bit lax about not controlling the smoke while I'm cooking, my home insurance might increase, while something else might not, or somebody else who lives beside me and better manages his or her kitchen might not. Similarly, you see Watson AI and primary care teleconsulting. Basically, artificial intelligence is providing better primary care information by consulting more cases.
Here's what I found.
On the other hand, you'll see there's a cradle-to-grave customer digital experience. They're linking health to search to location. They're trying to figure out how your Apple Watch is measuring your health all the time. It's figuring out where you are, what you're searching to get a better degree view or a better view, such as Facebook's 360-degree view of Facebook knows much better than even we do about when we're depressed. Because we post certain things, we say certain things, we do certain things, that gives them a better way to profile us than even we can. And this is, of course, digitally transforming marketing while also creating echo chambers. When marketers know what we like, they feed us even more and more of it. And if it is something that is too much, we also fall into this absolute inauspicious mode of being in an echo chamber, or because all we do is just reinforce what we think rather than think outside the box. So to slowly, the last fun interview before we quietly, we'll have a couple of slides to finish off. Quite a few Fortune 500 companies are moving towards a 3-day office per week. What days do you think Apple and Nokia are scheduling? Option 1, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Option 2, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Option 3, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And again, 10 seconds. And the answer is number 1, which is Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. That's what's becoming an overall consensus in the Silicon Valley HR community, that this is where performance at a physically present office matters the most. So, finishing off, what is to be done, given that we know how things are changing or understanding how things are changing? Firstly, we have to realize that digital transformation is not just, we as executives, you have to separate hype from hope. So digital transformation comes with its own dark side. The first is that securing and trusting digital transformation is very, very important. And there is therefore a need for more cybersecurity managers, not just developers. So digital transformation comes with this whole idea of it could become dangerous very, very quickly, or turn dangerous very quickly. So there is a need for trust. It could very well become a day where somebody might simply send a text to any of us saying, pay me a ransom or I'll lock you out of your house and car. And things like that have happened. The Colonial Pipeline shutdown was a perfect example of how a cyber physical infrastructure can be impacted. About half of the eastern northeast oil flow came through Colonial Pipeline. What the perpetrators did was they hacked into the billing system and shut it down. And the answer was, give us about $3.5 million and we'll get everything back on track. But that is the cost of digitally transforming. And it's important to understand that every solution also comes with its own peril. So Zoom similarly started a much more vetted entry, just the way you've seen. You can wait in a waiting room and somebody will let you in after these Zoom bombings sessions, where people could just dump whatever they wanted to. You could just have open access to things. So it's important to understand it has a dark side. It's also important to build supply chain transparency, from vaccines, health, to Bitcoins and security. It's important to understand in this age, especially if you look at mRNA vaccines such as Pfizer and BioNTech ones, you'll find that they all need to be maintained at, it's called a cold supply chain. You have to maintain a very, very low temperature across the entire supply chain. But in order to understand that, you also have to build in transparency, and that transparency is being brought in by digital transformation. But transparency has to be foremost before you implement a transformation solution. Similarly, we understand that customer preference is changing faster than ever, thanks to TikTok. Manufacturers and retailers need to feel the changing pulse. You need to understand that we truly need to create more transparency about customer preferences, about logistics, about sustainable living. And finally, remote work and automation are here to stay. Flexible operations require diverse thinking. You have to think outside the box. Assuming what happened once and just playing with or just keeping it in situ, simply saying that this was just a blip, is just going to let the competition get ahead of you. And then commercial physical space must be more smartly managed, have to reduce fixed costs, focus much more on variable costs. Contract work is becoming more popular than full employment. Contribution margins therefore matter, because if you know that you might have a dire time, you might not want to have somebody come in and pay their fixed costs. So how you manage that requires a bit of next generation smarts. In-store automation, from cleaning robots, self-checkouts, touchless payments, Amazon Go, automated shopping, they're becoming a part of our general work and life. We need to learn to scale technologies for the future. We need to practice phased operational automation. But the big focus for HR is, how do you transition the workforce and manage change to prepare them for the future? Detroit is a perfect example. If you don't change for the future changes you forever. And finally, there is a tremendous need for digitally lean project managers who could reduce waiting times, redundancies, non-value added activities. And that is what the new era, this brave new digitally transformed world, holds for us. So finally, thank you very much. I think I went about 5 minutes past, but sorry about that. And so we tried talking a little bit more about the digital as a new normal and how we need to change gears in a post-pandemic world, or how the world has changed gears in this post-pandemic society. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm open for any questions and answers.